Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
The Pottermore ship was drifting dead in the middle of the commercial corridor. No transponder, no running lights, no distress call. Lieutenant Gabriel Sand spotted it on passive scan first. Pottermore vessels did not go dark. Not this far, inside regulated space. He ordered the helm to close the distance with the drifting ship and waited 3 minutes for an automatic greeting signal that never came. He keyed the intercom. "Summer." "Sir." "Suit up. 4 Marines. I want eyes inside that ship in 10 minutes. "Understood." Sand stood at the forward viewport and studied the vessel while the boarding team prepped. He had been running this corridor for 2 years. It was Pottermore construction. He could read that much from the hull geometry, the antenna configuration, the way the forward section tapered. He had seen enough of their trade ships to know the silhouette. But this was not a trade ship. Too small. Hull plating mismatched, like it had been pulled from different sources and fitted together under pressure. The docking collar looked retrofitted. Pottermore vessels that ran this corridor were large, recognizable, built for cargo and long haul. This looked like something assembled fast with whatever was left. An evacuation craft. A last option. "Lieutenant." His scan officer did not look up from her board. "No life signs reading, but the hull is interfering with deep penetration. Could be shielding, could be damage. Cannot confirm either way." Sand nodded. When Colonel Justin Summer checked in before departure, he relayed the scan report personally. No confirmed life signs, and a hull interfering with deep penetration scans, badly enough that nobody could say what was waiting inside the ship. Summer listened in silence, then ordered the boarding team forward. Before the boarding craft detached, he opened the HoloLink. "Summer. Full visual feed. I want to see everything you see." "Understood." Summer's helmet cam flickered on. 4 more feeds opened alongside it across the holo board. 5 points of view. 5 Marines preparing for boarding in real time. The boarding craft latched on 10 minutes later. The docking collar hissed and equalized. Summer went in first. His 4 Marines stacked behind him, weapons up, moving in the compressed silence of suits that recycled their own air. Sand watched from the bridge as the helmet feeds moved through the ship in real time. The corridor was narrow, lit only by flickering emergency strips mounted along the ceiling, and built wider than human standard for a species with a broader stance and different center of gravity. No sound came from inside except breathing and boots against the deck plating. Summer advanced carefully through the corridor, checking each section they passed before moving deeper into the ship. "Clear the nearest rooms first," he ordered over comms. "Then we keep moving." They found the infirmary 2 corridors in. The door was already open. Colonel Summer stopped in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. The helmet light swept slowly across the room, revealing bodies strapped to the medical beds. Pottermore. 4 of them, still strapped into the medical restraints. Their skin had gone the color of wet ash. Deep wounds covered parts of their bodies, surrounded by dried blood darkened against the pale surface of their skin and the restraints beneath them. They looked emaciated in a way that did not resemble ordinary illness or injury. There were no signs of a struggle. It looked like starvation or a disease. Nobody said anything. Summer marked the room and kept moving. The command center was different. Sand saw the green blood as Summer's helmet light swept across the room, not sprayed or splattered the way a pressurized wound would leave it. Smeared, dragged across the deck like something had been moved after the bleeding stopped. Fragments lay scattered across the floor that Sand refused to focus on for more than a glance. A Pottermore sat slumped forward in the pilot chair, restrained loosely against the harness straps. Summer approached carefully, checking the face, and then the markings etched along the collar ring Potamore diplomats used for identification. Lieutenant Sand. Summer's voice remained flat and professional, but something underneath it had changed. The pilot. It's Zoramon. Sand did not answer immediately. The holoboard brought the face close enough for recognition without needing confirmation from anyone. He had shared a negotiating table with Zoramon 4 times. He had always arrived on large diplomatic vessels surrounded by trade crews and ceremonial escorts. Sand had never seen him on anything like this. Check the console. The console was still active. A recording waited inside the system, looping automatically. Summer touched the panel, and a holo display expanded across the command center. Zoramon appeared alive again for a moment. His voice filled the room and carried through the feed to Sand's bridge at the same time. Calm, exhausted, the voice of someone who had already accepted the outcome before beginning the message. He explained the isolation. 9 months of silence, because they had not known how to warn anyone without risking the contamination spreading beyond the system. A vessel returning from the dark nebula market had brought something back, hidden inside its cargo. At first it looked harmless, black fungal growth spreading across 2 storage containers. They isolated the containers and scheduled them for incineration. Then something delayed the procedure. When the worker returned 2 hours later, the growth had spread across the floor and changed color from black to green. The security recording showed branch-like structures striking him the moment he approached. He died before anyone monitoring the feed could intervene. At first they believed it was a disease. By the time they understood it was something else, half the planet was already gone. The organism was not a fungus or a pathogen, but a parasitic life form that infected living hosts, reproduced inside the body, killed the host, and continued using the corpse afterward. The dead did not stay dead. Containment failed long before the Potamore understood what they were fighting. Trade routes were severed, the planet sealed, entire districts burned in failed attempts to slow the spread. Zoramon never lost composure while describing the extinction of his species. He spoke with the same measured precision he had once used during trade negotiations. He explained that the ship carried everything the Potamore had managed to learn: biological samples, research archives, recordings, tactical observations. His surviving crew intended to reach human space, deliver the warning, and destroy the vessel before the contamination could spread further. At the end of the recording, he apologized for not reaching them sooner. Then the message looped back to the beginning. Lieutenant Sand was still staring at the holoboard when he noticed something behind Moore. Zoramon was standing, not the recording, the body itself. A moment ago it had been slumped in the pilot chair. Now it stood silently behind the Marines, the harness hanging loose around it, its head tilted in a way that looked deeply unnatural. Something dark and wet pushed slowly between the jaw plates. Moore, do not move. Sand's voice cut across the comms before he fully processed what he was seeing. Summer, get away from him. Slowly. Summer and the other Marines took 2 careful steps forward. Then they turned back toward Moore, who was still standing in the same place, and saw Zoramon standing directly behind him. Too late for Moore. The branches erupted from Zoramon's mouth in a single violent motion. Not tendrils. Something thicker and structured, moving with terrifying speed and a kind of deliberate coordination that made the attack feel intentional rather than instinctive. They struck Moore at the knees and wrapped around his legs almost instantly, locking him to the deck before he could react. Moore looked down once. Then he pulled both combat knives from the front of his vest and started cutting. The Marines opened fire on the branches, trying to avoid Moore, but the growths were already swallowing him faster than they could cut them away. Fragments blasted loose by the gunfire scattered across the deck, but the branches still attached to Moore split and spread faster than before, replacing themselves as they climbed higher over his body. The branches reached his torso. His arms were now covered by them. Moore stopped fighting with his knives. When the branches reached Moore's neck, he was already gone. Not slowly. A sudden compression, fast and complete, followed by a sound over the comms that Sand already knew would never appear fully in any official report. Moore remained standing. That was the worst part. The branches held him upright. Only his head remained exposed. Then Zoramon collapsed. The body struck the deck, and the growths withdrew from the mouth before exploding outward across the floor in every direction at once. Green, fast, flooding through the gaps between deck plates and climbing the lower sections of the walls. Summer looked at his Marines. One word: move! They ran. The corridor outside the command center was darker than when they had entered it. The strip lighting along the ceiling stuttered, held, stuttered again. Helmet lights cut on automatically. Boots hammered the deck plating, and nobody spoke, while Summer kept the pace hard, back the way they had come, the extraction pod 2 corridors ahead. They passed the infirmary at a run. Summer's helmet light swept across the open doorway without him breaking stride. A single sweep of light was enough. The beds were empty. The restraints hung open. All 4 bodies that had been strapped down when they arrived were gone. They kept running. "Lieutenant," he said, breathing hard now. "The infirmary. The bodies." A beat. "They are not there anymore." Sand's voice came back immediately. "Get to the extraction pod. Now." Summer hit the junction at the end of the passage and stopped so fast the Marine behind him collided with his back. The 4 Potamore from the infirmary stood in the junction ahead, filling the width of the corridor. They stood perfectly still, staring forward with that same vacant focus. The green growth was already thick across the floor around their feet, spreading outward along the base of the walls in both directions. The branch structures between them and the Marines were dense and tangled, moving slowly but without pause as they searched through every gap in the deck plating. Behind the Marines, the corridor lights flickered one last time and went dark. There was no way through. There was no extraction pod. There was no way back. Summer raised his weapon and started shooting. The transmission cut. Sand heard it go. He stood at the forward viewport of his ship and looked at the Potamore vessel drifting 40 meters off the hull, and he did not let himself think about Summer. Did not let himself think about Moore, about the Marines whose names he would write into a report before this shift was over. He keyed the weapons officer. "Full salvo, target the Potamore vessel." A pause. "Sir?" "Full salvo." "Aye, sir." The first round hit the docking collar. The second hit the engine housing. By the third, the Potamore ship was coming apart, venting atmosphere, hull sections spinning outward in the slow, silent way things broke apart in vacuum. Just light, and then debris, and then nothing where the ship had been. Sand stood at the viewport until the debris field stopped moving. Later, inside the briefing room at Casper Ridge, he told General Goldman everything from the intercept to the fire order. Goldman did not interrupt once. He sat across the table and listened to Sand walk through the entire operation. No expression. No questions until Sand stopped talking. Then he said, "The research data. Gone with the ship. We have the recording. Nothing else made it." Goldman was quiet for a moment. Zoramon's plan was to destroy the ship himself. "Yes, sir." "You did it for him." Sand did not answer that. Goldman stood and moved to the viewport. Casper Ridge sat high enough that the trade corridor was visible as a faint traffic line against the dark. He looked at it for a while, The comms officer knocked once and opened the door without waiting. General. Incoming signal. Sector-wide broadcast. A pause. From the dark nebula market. Goldman turned. Put it up. The wall display opened. Text only. No video, no representative, no voice attached. A formal notice addressed to all trading partners across the sector. Effective immediately, all incoming vessels were being turned away. Indefinite duration. The stated reason was a quarantine measure for a minor, non-dangerous disease. No further details. No projected reopening. Goldman read it once. Then he looked at Sand. Sand looked back at him. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Goldman turned back to the viewport. Double the decontamination protocols on every ship coming through this corridor. Nothing docks at Casper Ridge without a full sweep. He paused. And pull everything we have on the dark nebula market. Trade records, traffic logs, every ship that came out of there in the last 18 months. Sir, if that thing is already past their borders, I know, Sand. Goldman's voice did not rise. Get some rest. I need you thinking straight. Sand left the briefing room and said nothing else. Behind him, the wall display still showed the notice from the dark nebula market. A minor, non-dangerous disease. No further details. The corridor outside Casper Ridge was quiet. Routine traffic, normal signals. Everything exactly as it should be. For now, 6 months of quiet is not the same as 6 months of nothing. Sand ran patrols, filed reports, watched every ship that came through the corridor like it might be the one that changed everything. Most of them were cargo haulers and survey vessels, and the occasional diplomatic courier, moving between systems that still trusted each other enough to trade. Nothing flagged, nothing unusual. The dark nebula market stayed closed and said nothing further, and Goldman's people found no useful information in the traffic logs from the 18 months prior. Plenty of ships had come out of there. Any one of them could have been carrying something. None of them had declared it. Goldman had spent the 6 months building a protocol that did not have an official name yet. Decontamination procedures were upgraded across every docking bay on Casper Ridge. Quarantine holds were expanded. A dedicated response team assembled quietly and drilled twice a week in the lower decks. The people on Casper Ridge who paid attention understood that Goldman was preparing for something specific. Then the Birdom invitation came in, a coronation. New queen. Every species in the sector was invited, the message said, to witness the ceremony and celebrate the continuation of the Birdom royal line. It was the kind of event that happened once in a generation. Declining without cause would be read as a diplomatic insult. Goldman read the invitation twice, and then called Sand into the briefing room. I need a representative. Sand looked at the invitation on the display. How many can I bring? Small escort. 8. Enough to look respectful, not enough to look like a security detail. When? Goldman told him. Sand nodded and left the room and started picking his people. There was no need to explain the situation to the Marines in detail. They had already read the corridor incident report and watched the recording afterward. Sand briefed them once aboard the ship on the way there and kept it short. Watch the crowd. Watch the exits. Stay together. If I move, you move with me. Nobody asked questions. The Birdom homeworld was 2 days from Casper Ridge by corridor travel, and loud in the way that places full of living things always are. The ceremonial complex sat at the center of their capital, open air under a pale sky, wide stone platforms, arranged in descending rings around a central stage. Species from across the sector filled the rings shoulder to shoulder, or whatever passed for shoulders, on the ones that did not have them. Sand had never seen that many different forms of life in one place. The sheer biological variety of it was something that would have been remarkable under any other circumstances. He put his people in the middle ring, not the front, where the ceremony attendants moved and the view was best. Not the back, where the exits were, but the sightlines were poor. The middle. He could see the stage clearly. He could see 4 different exit points. He kept his escort in a short defensive arc so every Marine could watch the crowd without exposing their back completely. The Birdom were avian, tall, feathered, with a bearing that suggested they had been the dominant species on this world long enough to carry it in their posture. The ceremony attendants moved smoothly through the rings, distributing something ceremonial in shallow bowls, adjusting banners, preparing the stage. Sand watched the crowd. He watched the way species clustered by familiarity, the small diplomatic tension visible in which groups stood close and which left space between themselves, the way the Birdom attendants moved with the particular confidence of people on their own ground. The ceremony began with sound. Some kind of instrument Sand could not identify, producing a low resonant tone that the Birdom around him responded to with a visible physical reaction. Feathers settling, posture shifting. The crowd quieted. The Queen emerged from the inner corridor at the back of the stage. Sand watched her walk, 30 meters away. Ceremonial robes, moving with the slow, deliberate pace that formal occasions demanded. The crowd leaned forward collectively. Sand's eyes went to her hands first, too still at her sides, fingers slightly spread, unmoving beneath the ceremonial sleeves. Then to her face, the same vacant stillness, the same unfocused gaze Zoramon had worn standing behind Moore. Sand looked toward the exits. He turned to the Marine on his left and said nothing, just moved. 1 step back, slow, keeping his body angled toward the stage like he was still watching. The Marine read it and shifted without a word. Sand moved his eyes to the next person in his escort and tilted his head toward the exit at the left of the ring. They started moving, slowly, working through the crowd with patience, excusing past other species, not fast enough to draw attention. The Queen reached the center of the stage. Sand was 12 meters from the exit. He heard it before he saw it. Not a sound from the Queen. A sound from the crowd at the front of the ring. Something between a gasp and a retreat. A collective backward motion that rippled outward through the packed space. Sand stopped moving slowly and started moving fast. Behind him, the sound changed. He did not look back. He accelerated toward the exit, and his escort immediately tightened around him, collapsing into a compact formation as they pushed through the crowd. Around them, other species were turning and colliding as panic spread unevenly through the crowd, the packed rings breaking apart in every direction at once, while whatever was happening on the stage registered across 100 different nervous systems in 100 different ways. Sand hit the exit corridor at a run. Behind him, he heard it. A wet sound, multiple impacts, then screaming in at least 4 different languages simultaneously. The corridor fed into an outer courtyard, and the courtyard opened onto the landing zone, where their ship waited with engines already running. They boarded in under 2 minutes. The ramp came up. Sand was on the comms to the cockpit before he finished strapping in. "Get us to orbit. Now." The ship lifted. Through the viewport, Sand caught one image of the ceremonial complex below before the angle took it away. The outer rings of the platform were moving, not crowd movement. Something spreading across the stone surfaces, dark at the edges and bright green at the center, expanding outward through the packed ceremonial tiers, far faster than panic alone should have moved. Minutes later, the ship cleared the upper atmosphere and reached orbit, and Sand made himself stop looking at the planet below. Goldman had the decontamination bays open before Sand's ship finished docking. Full protocol. Ozone saturation. high-concentration chemical wash across every surface, including the people. Sand and his crew stood in the decontamination chamber and breathed recycled air through their masks without speaking while the process ran. Then came 10 days in quarantine. Goldman locked the section down personally and checked the readings himself every morning. On the 10th day, the readings were still clean, all of them. Goldman came in person to open the quarantine seal. He looked at Sand for a moment before speaking. "Clean." "Yes, sir." Goldman nodded once and stepped back to let them out. The calls started coming in that same afternoon. Not one. Not two. 10 of them. Stacked and waiting. Sand was in the mess, eating for the first time outside quarantine, when Goldman's comms officer found him and told him to come to the briefing room. When he arrived, the board was lit with incoming signals. Goldman was already there. He played them in order. 10 species. 10 different languages run through translation. 10 messages that were different in tone and detail and biological vocal register, but were all saying the same thing. Planetary quarantine. Effective immediately. Reason unspecified or given as precautionary measure. Pending investigation. No requests for assistance. No further information. Sand recognized every species name on the board. He had seen every one of them at the coronation. Goldman let the last message finish, and then the room was quiet. "They are not asking for help," Sand said. "The Podamore did not ask for help either. They just went quiet," Goldman said. Goldman looked at the board. These ones went quiet faster. The Podamore took 9 months. These took 12 days. Sand thought about that. They knew faster, or they are further along. Either way. Goldman moved to the map display and brought up the sector. The infected and suspected worlds illuminated one after another across the map. The Podamore homeworld, the dark nebula market still under quarantine, the Birdum homeworld, and now 10 more systems scattered along the major trade corridors. The pattern was impossible to miss. None of the outbreaks were isolated. Every infected world connected to another through shipping lanes, diplomatic routes, or commercial traffic moving constantly between systems. "It spreads through contact between us," Goldman said. "Species gathering, ships moving between worlds, civilizations opening their doors to each other." Sand looked at the map. The outbreak markers formed a clear pattern across the sector, spreading outward along trade routes and diplomatic corridors, with no sign that the expansion was slowing. "We barely have any data," Sand said. "A recording from Zoramon and a few days of scattered observations from the Birdum outbreak. That's not enough to fight something we still don't understand." Goldman studied the map in silence for a long moment. "We need a live sample," he said at last. "That means entering an infected world, capturing the organism, and bringing it back contained." Sand said nothing for a second. "The Birdum homeworld," Goldman said finally. "We know what it looked like 12 days ago. We have the layout from your visit. We know the infection started at the ceremonial complex, and we know roughly how fast it moves across open surfaces." He looked at Sand. "It is the newest infection point we have, which means it may not have reached full saturation yet, which means there may still be areas where a team can operate." "May," Sand said. "May," Goldman confirmed. He zoomed the map inward toward the ceremonial complex. "Small team. Full containment equipment. Extraction protocol finalized before deployment." Sand looked at the map, at the Birdum homeworld marker, at the spread of infection pushing outward through the sector, along routes civilizations had spent centuries building to connect themselves to each other. "Which landing zone?" he asked. Goldman pointed at the map. The Birdum homeworld did not look like a city anymore. Sand stood at the edge of the landing zone and looked at what 2 weeks had done. The outer district Goldman had chosen specifically because it was far from the ceremonial complex was gone, not destroyed. Consumed. Branch structures covered every building face he could see, thick layered growth climbing from ground level to rooftop, until the district no longer looked constructed at all. It looked grown. He clicked his comms twice. The team tightened behind him without a word. 4 Marines, 3 military scientists in reinforced containment suits, carrying equipment that made them slower than Sand liked. Full ozone tanks on every back, chemical spray rigs on both forearms, sealed suits checked 3 times before they left the ship. They moved into the outer district in a tight formation, and Sand took point. The streets were not empty. Infected Birdham moved between the buildings with the same vacant stillness Sand had seen at the coronation, feathers matted with green growth, and movements that looked wrong in ways he could not fully name. Some moved alone. Others drifted through the streets in loose groups with no visible coordination, yet somehow still forced the team to change direction twice in the first 3 minutes. Sand did not engage unless he had to. Noise carried. The scientists needed time, and time required quiet. They found what they were looking for in a collapsed structure 4 blocks from the landing zone. A birdom in a doorframe, half upright, movements stuttering between something almost alive and something already gone. Early transition. The branch growth was visible along the neck and left shoulder, but the host was still caught between stages, not yet fully reanimated, not yet coordinated. Sand looked at the lead scientist. Dr. Vassar. Compact, methodical, the kind of man who briefed you on risk the way other people discussed weather. Vassar looked at the birdom, then at the containment unit his team was unfolding, then back at Sand. 30 seconds once we open the unit, maybe less. You have 20. Vassar nodded and moved. What happened next was not clean. The birdom responded to approach with a speed that the stutter in its movement had not suggested was possible. Branches erupted from the shoulder growth, and the Marine on the left took one across the visor that cracked the outer layer without breaching it. Sand hit the host from the right with a containment clamp, while Vassar locked the lower half of the reinforced transport containment unit around the host's body. Another Marine secured the upper section as the branches continued thrashing inside the partially sealed frame. One of them slipped through the narrow gap between a Marine's glove and sleeve, and Sand burned it out with a full ozone burst from less than half a meter away before it could reach exposed skin. The unit sealed. The third Marine checked the wrist seal immediately. Suit integrity held, skin below unbroken. They ran. In the last block before the landing zone, they encountered 2 groups of parasite-controlled birdham coming from different directions. One dropped from a second-story structure directly into the formation, branch growths erupting toward the containment unit before it even hit the ground. The Marine on the left caught it with a full ozone burst at point-blank range. The branches ignited green-white and recoiled hard enough to expose the host underneath. The second Marine put 3 rounds through the birdom's skull before the growth could reorganize. Nobody stopped moving. More infected were converging from the surrounding streets now, drawn by the noise. The Marines on the outside of the formation hit them with ozone bursts as they advanced, forcing openings long enough for the scientists to stay moving in the center with the containment unit between them, while Sand ran point and drove the team straight through the landing zone perimeter. The ramp sealed behind them as the ship lifted. The quarantine bay was the size of a large storage room and reeked of chemicals strong enough to sting through the filters. Full ozone and chemical wash swept across every suit before the bay door finally opened. Vassar had the containment unit secured on the examination table before Sand finished removing his helmet. The infected birdom remained trapped behind reinforced transparent panels, while the branch growths continued striking the inside of the sealed chamber. The contained birdham was still in transition. The branch growth moved against the inside of the unit walls in slow exploratory patterns, pressing at the seams, finding no purchase on the treated surfaces. The host itself had progressed further since capture. Less stuttering now. More of that wrong coordinated movement that meant the parasite was establishing control. Vassar and his two scientists worked with the focused silence of people who understood exactly how much was riding on the next few hours. They tested fire first, a directed heat application against a branch sample extracted through the unit's sealed port. The branch died fast and completely, but Vassar shook his head. It only confirms what we already knew. Fire can kill them. We need contact mechanics. How does it transfer at the cellular level? They ran ozone alone against extracted samples. It killed the growth, but the kill time had a window. 3 to 4 seconds from contact to death. In a real exposure scenario, those seconds were enough for the transfer to initiate. Chemical wash alone. Similar window. Slightly longer. Vassar pushed closer to the unit. He was running a direct observation on the branch behavior against different surface materials, holding treated and untreated sample panels against the exterior of the unit wall, and watching how the branches inside responded to each. Untreated biological surface material. The branches pressed hard against the unit wall at that point. Treated panel. They moved across it without finding purchase and redirected elsewhere. He was leaning in to mark an observation on his datapad when the branch shot through the unit's sample port faster than the automatic seal could close. The second scientist killed it almost immediately with a full ozone burst, burning the growth apart before it could spread through the bay. But in that brief moment, the branch had already struck Vassar's right glove. It did not penetrate through a failed seal. The growth physically tore through the outer layer on contact, splitting the material apart with enough force to expose the skin underneath. Vassar looked at the damaged glove, at the strip of exposed skin beneath it. Then he said one word. Now. The second scientist hit the exposed hand with a full ozone spray from the emergency rig mounted on the wall. Chemical wash followed immediately after. Vassar held his hand perfectly still, while both flooded across the exposed skin and the torn edges of the glove. Then he looked down again. No branch growth. No visible transfer. The room went completely silent. The preventative chemical treatment already coating the gloves and skin appeared to have interrupted the infection before it could establish itself. Vassar removed the damaged glove carefully and handed it to the nearest scientist without taking his eyes off his own hand. Then he picked up the data pad again. "Run it again," he said. "Slower this time. I want to see exactly what happened when the branch contacted the treated surface." They ran it again. And again. Extracting branch samples through the sealed port and applying them to surfaces with different treatment combinations. Ozone alone, chemical alone, alcohol alone, each one insufficient on its own. The branch found purchase through moisture, biological moisture, living surface. That was the entry point. The anchor. Remove that and the transfer could not initiate. But removing it required all three elements working simultaneously. The ozone disrupted the branch's surface chemistry. The chemical compound broke down the biological moisture layer. The alcohol stripped what remained and kept the surface dry at a level the branch could not overcome. Any two of the three, and the branch still found a way. All three together. And it found nothing. Vassar looked at the data for a long moment. Then he said, "It is not a new weapon. We have been carrying this answer in our decontamination kits since before I joined the service." Sand crossed the bay to the examination table. He looked at the containment unit, at the branch, growth pressing against the interior walls. at the host behind it, fully reanimated now, moving in that coordinated wrong way. He unsealed his right glove and pulled it off. Vassar looked at him. "Lieutenant." Sand picked up the spray rig from the table, applied the full combination to his bare hand. Ozone, chemical, alcohol. Let it dry for 5 seconds. Then he pressed his bare palm flat against the exterior wall of the containment unit, where a branch was pressing from the other side. The branch reached the unit wall, pressed against it where Sand's hand was, moved across the surface, found nothing to grip, redirected. Sand held his hand there for 10 seconds. Then he pulled it back and looked at his palm. Unbroken. Clean. He sealed his glove back on and opened his comms to Casper Ridge. "General Goldman." "Sand." "We have it." Goldman did not waste time. The formula went out sector-wide within the hour. Full transmission, ozone concentration ratios, chemical compound specifications, alcohol grade requirements, application method, reapplication intervals. Every detail Vassar and his team had documented in the last 4 hours, transmitted clean and complete to every species still capable of receiving a signal. No conditions attached, no negotiation, no trade arrangement built around it. Goldman sent it the way you send a fire alarm, because the building was burning, and the only thing that mattered was getting everyone out. The responses came back over the following hours. Some species had the components already and began production immediately. Others had partial components, and human ships were rerouted to cover the gaps. Vassar worked with 3 different species science teams simultaneously over long-range comms, adjusting the formula for different biological surface chemistries, because what worked on human skin needed calibration for species whose biology operated differently. It was not fast. It was not clean. Some planets were already too far into infection to matter. Goldman marked those on the sector map with a different color and said nothing about them in briefings. Everyone in the room understood what the color meant. But the map stopped growing. Not immediately. Not everywhere. But the spread moving outward along the trade routes and diplomatic corridors of the sector finally began to encounter populations already sprayed, sealed, and chemically saturated, to the point that the parasite could no longer use them as viable hosts. Contact still happened. Transfer failed. Sand was at the viewport in Goldman's briefing room when the map stabilized for the first time, 3 days after the transmission. He had not slept much. He was not sure Goldman had slept at all. He looked at the markers that were never going to disappear. The Potamore homeworld, the dark nebula market, still closed and silent, whatever was happening inside it, already beyond saving. The Birdham homeworld, others. Civilizations that had been alive only weeks earlier, trading, building, arguing, celebrating, now reduced to colored markers on a military map. Zoramon had known, had built an emergency ship from whatever was left and crossed the corridor alone to deliver a warning to the one species he trusted to do something with it. Had died in that pilot chair, still trying. Moore had died standing, knives in his hands. Summer and his Marines had died in a corridor 40 meters from Sand's viewport, while Sand watched through a hollow board and gave the fire order. Goldman came to stand beside him. They looked at the map together. The markers that were dark, the ones that were not. The shape of what had been lost and what had survived. Goldman studied the sector for a moment. Then he said, "Zoramon got his warning through." Sand nodded. Outside the viewport, Caspar Ridge held its position in the dark while the trade corridor ran quiet below them. And somewhere out in the sector, species were still alive because of humanity's discovery of how to contain the contamination. For now, it was enough.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here. Or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.